Welcome to the Bard of All Trades podcast. I'm your host, BradElBard, and today I have the man, Eric Dagati. Drove all the way out to his gym here in New Jersey. We're in Fairfield, New Jersey.
Yes, we are.
And it's going to be a good time. We're going to go into some fitness stuff and some injury prevention, I hope. We're going to be talking about some jiu-jitsu. But before we get into that, I just want to talk about my sponsors really quick. darklegacy.net. If you guys want to check out some really cool creative writing stuff, they have some really cool things in the works. Check that stuff out. Also, Hybrid Healer. Get back to training faster and stay on the mats longer. Make sure that you guys check her out, and she can do gym calls and do some stuff to take care of your team there. And finally, Valley Jiu-Jitsu. If you guys want 1 week free of learning how to choke people, go check them guys out in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Mention me, and you get a week for free. And shout out to Sam, my Patreon supporter this month. What's up, Eric? Sorry,
how are
it's
you?
a mouthful. I always have to get through that.
No worries. Got to keep this bus rolling.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, dude, this is a pretty cool sports complex that we're parked outside of. It's like a baseball facility. I saw like some batting cages and stuff in there. So how did you get involved with this spot?
So I had my own facility for about 12 years. And then what was happening is I was doing so much outside consulting and teaching that it got to be a point where I couldn't really continue to grow it the way I wanted to, and I was missing out on opportunities out there. So I got rid of the facility, kept the brand name.
Nice.
There was a physical therapy group that was leasing space from us. We worked out a deal. They took it over. I kept the brand name, and then I needed space just for the handful of clients that I do see, and worked out a deal with a local baseball school, since a big component of what I work with is baseball and softball players.
Oh, nice.
And so I got a little gym space here. It does what I need to do, and allows me to still do all the other things I want to be able to do outside of this as well.
That's awesome, man. So you work with a lot of like the rehabilitation kind of stuff, right? Like if a person's injured, you're kind of telling them how they can get back onto the field and stuff like that, right?
In some cases, yeah. Hopefully we don't get to that point. I want to be kind of the Robin Hood to keep people away from the orthopedic surgeon, right?
Dude,
and keep
that's
them out
awesome.
of PT.
Absolutely.
So that's the primary goal, is to improve their performance. But unfortunately, athletes do get hurt. And so they'll get referred to me as either the next step out of PT or whatever rehab they're doing, or they've gone through the mill, right? They've gone through where I've tried PT and I've tried chiropractors, I've tried acupuncturists, and nothing's working. But I found out about you. Could you help me out? And I get to be that guy sometimes. And
that's
so
awesome.
that's where I'm kind of the last ditch effort to say nothing else seems to work because nobody's figured me out. And I fill that role sometimes. But the primary thing is just getting people to perform at their best at whatever that is.
Nice, man. So yeah, that's amazing that you do that. So what are some things that you do in the room to, have these baseball athletes manifest their full potential? Like what kind of workouts and things do you have them do?
So I get texts all the time from saying, hey, can you give me a workout for baseball? Can you give me a workout for wrestling or jiu-jitsu, whatever it may be?
Yeah.
And I'm always going to answer your question with at least 4 more questions.
Yeah.
And then my first question is always going to be, so if you said to me, all right, Brad is somebody who competes in jiu-jitsu or does MMA, and you say, can you give me a workout for MMA? I'm going to say, my first question is, well, why aren't you as good as you could be right now? Like, what is the missing link? And I always have this conversation. If I had a magic wand in my cabinet in there, which I don't, would make our lives a lot easier, right? But if I had one, what is the one thing that's holding you back? Because there's a lot of things that go into what happens when you get on that mat. And I need to know what are the things that you don't have that you need. And so the only way I find that out is through an assessment process, and to figure out what are all those elements. And those elements are done through a very systematic process. The first thing is the bottom of the pyramid, and we show it in a pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid is health. Like, are you healthy? Meaning that no one ever, scored a goal, no one ever to hit a home run from the training room. Like, you need to be able to be healthy first. And we need to make sure that you're not working around injuries or any of those types of things, right?
That makes sense. And maybe like other aspects of the game could be like, maybe my cardio's bad, like I gas out too quickly, or maybe I'm not that flexible. Like in a jiu-jitsu perspective, I feel like those are some of the places people will struggle.
And unfortunately, we guess at that. And a lot of what we guess at is really wrong. You know how many times I've been told by a coach, oh, this kid needs core strength, right? When they don't even know what core strength even means, right? Or, I hear a lot of that, especially with fighters, is that, oh, he just needs more wind. Well, no, he needs to get punched in the face a bunch, and then he'll have a lot more energy at the end of a fight, right? So he needs to learn. So if you break it down systematically, you say, okay, well, first, are you healthy? Then do you move well? Is movement your restriction? Can you do the most fundamental things that you need to do? Just be able to touch your toes, be able to rotate, be able to squat, lunge, these types of things. And then is there specific movements you need to be able to have for your sport that you need to, that either you have or you don't have. And then we check those boxes. And then it comes to performance. Do you have the strength, the speed, the power, all those things? And then you look at conditioning. Then you look at your body composition. And then you look at all, on top of all that, you have to have the mental that puts it all together. And so if you don't have all these elements, my job is to figure out which ones you don't have and then systematically plug them in. So I can take two people who have the exact same goal and need two completely different programs because they need two different things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. I like how you explained the depth of that you can really dive into that sort of thing. So what do you do when someone comes to you with like a specific injury? Like, let's say, let me ask you this first, maybe, because you're working so specifically with baseball. What are some common baseball injuries?
Well, obviously you have any arm injuries, shoulder or elbow are the most common ones that you have there.
I feel like I've heard of people like doing stuff to their elbow when they're the pitcher, right? Like that's this kind of thing that can get jacked up.
So a half hour before you got here, I had two pro pitchers, both who have had Tommy John surgery. Both have zippers of stitches on their elbows, and they're looking to not go back there because that is a brutal rehab to go through. And unfortunately, it's commonplace. And you won't find many pro level baseball players that haven't had it, including position players.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's a really common thing. And so some of it is, then there's multiple causes to that. So you just keep asking why and how did you get here? And so, is it that you just overpitched, meaning that baseball has now become like every other sport where it's a year-round thing and kids are being driven into being one sport athletes, and now you're pitching from March all the way to November and your arm just can't handle that much, and so it's an overuse thing. Or maybe it's an under preparation thing. Maybe you can't do some fundamental things like a push-up or be able to control your body, and so because of that you put extra stress on your arm. Maybe it's mechanical. Maybe you just don't throw the ball well and it's leading to additional stress. So unless you have a systematic way of critical thinking and peeling the onion, we're just throwing shit against the wall and hoping it works.
Yeah.
And that's what unfortunately a lot is happening, not only in training and in rehab. We're just going to assume, well, you need core strength, so let's just do a bunch of planks. And that may get you really good at planks, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have core strength that you can actually use on a mat, use on a mound, use, out on a court.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So is there like a warm-up that you recommend to like pitchers and other baseball athletes to kind of prepare that, those ligaments and those muscles for use, on the field?
Okay, again, I'm going to break it down even further. So we'll take the two guys that were just here.
Yeah.
One is more on the stiff side. He's more of a if you watch him move, he generally, if you let him go, you leave him, out on the porch for a year, he's going to stiffen up, right? And so he needs to work more on mobility. He needs to work on specific mobility in certain areas. The other guy is hypermobile, meaning he's super, like they say some people are double jointed, like he's that guy. We'll drop into a split and not feel a thing, like can bend fingers back, like all that kind of stuff. If you give him a bunch of mobility work, you will actually make him worse and more susceptible to injury. So if I give them both the same warm-up, someone's getting screwed in that deal.
Wow, I didn't even think about that. Like every body is different, right?
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of two different ends of the spectrum. So if and the same thing can be applied, scratch out baseball player and apply it to any sport. So you look at fighters. Fighters are being put into positions where they're trying to submit somebody, and they're putting a joint in a vulnerable position, whether it's an arm bar or something of that nature. Now, if I'm hypermobile, I'm more likely to dislocate that joint. And so I need to stiffen around that joint to protect that person, because it's going to be easy to get him in that position, but it's going to be real easy for them to snap, and they're not going to be able to stop it from happening. So they need to create a little more tension and a little more stability and glue around that joint. If someone's stiff and they're hypomobile, they can't move, well, they're going to tap out right away because they can't even get their hand behind their back, let alone you put it there, and it's going to immediately put them into a compromised position. So you have to look at where you're coming from and what are the demands of your sport and your activity to see, do you at least meet those minimums, and then what side of the continuum are you on? And it's kind of like working with the body, and I can see you got a guitar case right here, so I'm going to use lots of analogies.
Yeah.
So it's like tuning a guitar, right? When you take that thing out, and you tune it. You don't just tighten all the strings. You don't just loosen all the strings. You listen to each one and say, okay, this one needs to go up a little bit. This one needs to go down a little bit until you got it so it's just right. And that's essentially what my job is. An assessment is listening to all the strings and saying, do I need to tighten that up a little bit? Do I need to loosen that a little bit until I get it all right? Because your body is that instrument as an athlete. And so if you give an untuned, an out of tune instrument to that athlete, it doesn't matter how good their skill is. So if you can take Jimi Hendrix and give him an out-of-tune guitar, it's not going to sound like Jimi Hendrix anymore, right? So because his implement is out of tune. So you can take a great athlete, and if they're out of tune, it's going to limit their ability to express their skill. And so we need to take away those limitations. We got to take away those barriers that are allowing them to express their skill. Now, you give a finely tuned guitar to someone who doesn't know how to play guitar, it doesn't mean they're Jimi Hendrix, right? And so you still need to have the skill, right? I can make you really an explosive, powerful, mobile, durable athlete, but if you don't know how to fight at the end of the day, you're still going to get your ass kicked on the mat. So there's that you have to understand where skill fits in. My job is to make sure that you have no barriers to expressing your skill.
Man, that makes so much sense. I just had like an Olympic weightlifter on the show, and we were discussing like some things about just like the forms that you need to do for like on power lifts versus Olympic lifts and things like that. And it's crazy to think about like what you just mentioned, where you need to tighten some things up because they're going to be more susceptible in these like compromised situations, like when you're pitching and stuff. You just need more meat there. It makes a lot of sense that different sports demand like those different things. Can you talk a little bit about like what are the actual exercises you will recommend for like tightening like some things up for the pitcher's arm, like specifically?
Well, and then it's also an understanding of how everything connects, right? Functionally, in that you don't throw a ball with your arm. That's where the ball comes out of. But it's like the tail of the whip, right? You see the crack at the tail end, and that's where all the attention goes. But that force was created at the handle. And so I need to make sure that there's no weak links from the handle, so all that force can be expressed there. But I also have to understand that that if I don't generate that from there, then it's never going to create the amount of force it can. It's going to put more stress along the way. So it's a lot of times the best way to get elbows to be better is to get them better in single leg stance, to get them better at generating rotation through their pelvis, to get them to be able to do all those things.
Interesting. Kind of like a boxer
which is
punch, them
and you can have you have big jacked strong arms. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to actually throw a punch. And if you look at the body types and body sizes of people who are extremely powerful, they're not always the most aesthetically pleasing, jacked, ripped bodies, but they're just really smooth and efficient. And so you can that's how you have people in baseball who are 6'7" and 270 pounds, like an Aaron Judge, but at the same time, in the same sport, you have 5'6" Jose Altuve, who's 170 pounds, and they both hit the ball a ton. So how does that happen? Because it's not just about the meat that's on the bone. It's about how you can actually use that, sequence it, and be efficient as an athlete.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's a pretty personal story I have with one of the guys in my jiu-jitsu gym that is having some issues with a spinal injury that he got from like football. Like it's like a CTE injury, I think. What are some things that you recommend like some athletes will do to, prevent like spine injuries or even rehab themselves when they have these sorts of things?
That's a tricky thing because you got to figure out what exactly you could, because, well, you got to know what imprint that left on his body. Some people walk away from that traumatic experience in football, and I've worked a ton in football, and some of them end up being more hypermobile. They end up because they've dislocated that shoulder, it's much more likely to dislocate the next time. Some people respond by protective stiffening, and now it changes the whole symphony of how things move. And so I got to see how you responded to that. One of the biggest things that we don't think about is we always think about how much force we could produce. How much can you bench? How much can you squat? How far can you jump? All those are force production things. Most injuries happen in your ability to absorb and reduce force, whether I'm cutting on the field and my knee buckles and I blow out my ACL, whether it's my ability to absorb a punch or absorb a hit. All these things, your ability to be able to decelerate your arm when you throw a ball, those are the keys. And how well you can manage and absorb force and decelerate is just as important for an athlete than how much you can produce, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, like, what would you recommend for someone who has like maybe like a really stiff neck?
Okay, so the first thing you look at is it a mobility or is it a stability issue, right? Can they do simple things like just turn their head right to left, and can they just at least get their chin to line up with their collarbone? If not, you may have a mobility issue, but I'm going to come back to that in a second.
Yeah.
Can they tuck their chin down? Can they go back? Can they get the basic fundamental mobility? And then from there, if that's box checked, then you got to see, do they have stability? Now, here's the tricky thing with their body is that sometimes you will look like you're stiff or immobile in certain areas, but it's a protective mechanism that it's really an instability someplace else, where I'll have people that look like they have a stiff neck, but then you lay them on their back when there's no gravity there, or even better, you lay them on their back and have them hold a kettlebell in their arm. And all of a sudden, their head can turn really smooth. So what happened? Well, what's happening is that their shoulder lacks stability. It might have been that guy who dislocated his shoulder in a football game, and now all of a sudden his neck feels stiff. But then as soon as you stabilize the shoulder, hold a kettlebell, you have to stabilize your shoulder so you don't drop it on your face. And now all of a sudden, now that you stabilize the shoulder, now the neck that was secondarily stabilizing your shoulder now starts to let go, and now all of a sudden their head's turning right to left. So stretching, mobilizing, doing all that stuff to the neck may actually make them worse, because people complain of stiff hips. Those hips may be stiff because you sit all day, because you travel a lot, those sorts of things. But your hips may be stiff because you don't have good stability of your lumbar spine, and that's what your core is there for. So if your core is not functioning properly, you don't have good stability of your pelvis and of your lumbar spine. Well, some muscles like your hip flexors and hamstrings, they'll stiffen up to help protect you from hurting yourself. Now, if I go and stretch those, it'll feel great for about 5 minutes, but I actually made you worse. I actually put you more at risk because that was the only thing holding you together.
Yeah.
And so now I have to make sure, is this a mobility or stability thing? Then when we look at is the positioning of it. Are you aware of the positioning of your shoulder? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Because those three things will completely change, right, how everything moves. And so even if you look at your shoulder, right? So let's, and people, you can try this at home. So if you just do this, if you get in a good tall posture, and I always say, think of a string that's kind of pulling the top of your head up here, so you're nice and long, like a puppet's pulling you up. Now, if you take your arms and bring them straight up overhead, it should be kind of a nice and free and easy movement. You don't really think of much. Now, if you go here and you get into the crappy posture most people are in all day because they're on phones and laptops, where your chest is dropped down, okay, which is going to round out your upper back a little bit. Your head kind of shoots forward a little bit. And now all of a sudden take the same motion and go like this and feel that really crappy pinchy feeling in your shoulders. That's an impingement, okay? And what's happening is because there needs to be certain mechanics that happen where as your arm goes up, your upper back reverses its curve. There's things that clear out of the way, and so that it allows this to happen. Well, if I can't do that and I'm stuck in this position, now all of a sudden I'm beating up my shoulder. Now I'm going to go to the doctor and say my shoulder hurts, right? And they can poke and prod and ice and stim and heat and rub and do everything in the world to your shoulder, but if they don't change the positioning and posture of your whole upper body, as soon as you go with your hand up overhead, it's going to start to hurt again. So you have to kind of look deeper than where exactly that issue is.
Treat the symptom, treat the source.
Exactly. And you have to have a system of kind of breaking that down. And we've made a lot of shoulders better by never ever touching the shoulder, right? And looking at all sorts of other stuff. And it can be a pretty wild, indirect process. Sometimes it's really easy to figure out, and sometimes it's a little tougher. And you figure out that someone's hip pain's coming from lack of ankle mobility. Right. And then if you don't have a process of elimination, you miss that. You keep rubbing their hip and shoulder. It feels a little bit better. And then it comes back as soon as they go for a walk or as soon as they go for a run.
Yeah, because like they're unstable in the other parts of the body. That's crazy to think about that. Do you have any like recommendations that you give any people that come to you maybe when they're like someone who has like a sedentary lifestyle working in a cubicle? I know I came from that life, and I kind of moved on from that as I kind of decided it wasn't the life for me. So, I know like a lot of people definitely had like chronic injuries. Even me, I had issues with my wrists, like, sitting, moving the mouse all day. It's crazy. Like I can bench press all day, but the mouse is what killed me,
Yeah, well, it's those chronic positions and postures that you get into, and you get into these shapes that you don't have an ability to get yourself out of. And then, like, I'm not going to tell people to quit your job. Like, that's not realistic, but you have to understand that you need to undo those things, and your exercise has to match that. So if you're constantly in this flexed position, meaning everything's going towards that fetal position, well, a lot of your exercise has to be extension biased. We have to work on getting you to be able to extend your hips, getting you to be able to extend your spine, and getting everything to pull back that's getting pulled forward here, and learning how to own those postures, both statically and dynamically, is really kind of the key to that. So you have to undo what you're doing all day, and you have to kind of understand that's a habit. Movement is a habit, right? So if we look at just from a movement standpoint, when people talk about learning movement, they always want to look at, well, what's the stretch to do? What's the exercise to do? And understand that it may not need to be either. It's just establishing a new habit, like having people have a reminder at their desk that maybe goes off every 15 minutes to just get taller, right? That may be what they need, so they're spending less time here and they get more comfortable here. So let me give you another example, all right? Cross your arms for me. All right. Now, first of all, who taught you how to cross your arms?
I feel like I just knew.
Yeah, it just kind of happens. That's how
Arnold Schwarzenegger do it. And I was like, that's cool.
But that's how we learned how to move in the first place. We didn't have a movement coach when we were younger to come in and teach us how to roll over and crawl and sit up and all that stuff. It just happens. We have developmental milestones as a child that the World Health Organization recognizes for the first 21 months of your life, that you first track with your eyes, and then you can lift up your head, and then you can roll from front to back and back to front, and then you can get up on all fours, and you kind of rock, and you scoot a little bit, and then you start to crawl, and then once you can crawl, and then you can get up into a kneeling position, and then you can stand up and kind of rock yourself, and then you can go and start to walk. That whole process happens without any coaching. All right, it's a magical process, and that's why they check those milestones as a parent with a child to make sure that you're hitting those, because if not, there's a dysfunction there they need to address. Well, we spend the first 21 months really monitoring this stuff, and then the rest of your life, forget about it, right? And then you spend the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years sitting at his desk and chair screwing that up. And now how you respond to that is going to be different for each person. So that movement habit of this, nobody taught you. It just happened, just like rolling, crawling, and all that stuff. Now, here's the thing. If I told you, go ahead and set up into your cross your arms again for me.
Yeah.
All right. Now, if I ask an entire room of people when I go teach a workshop to do this, some people have their fingers tucked under. Some people will have their whole hand exposed here. There will be a different way. And I'll say, all right, what's the right way to do it? Yeah. And there isn't, right? Yeah. It's just that's what your natural habit is. Now, if I told you do this, switch it. It's weird, right? It's bizarre, like it's freaky. But this is what happens when you ask people to get out of their normal postures. They feel this awkward. And so if I have to explain when I'm coaching coaches and trainers to say, this is what your client or athlete feels like when you're asking them to do something they don't quite understand. But if I said, look, here's your mission. Your homework now is every day you have to cross your arms the opposite way. And you come back here in a month, you won't remember what the original way was, because you've now established a new movement habit. And so now my job is to establish new movement habits. So you don't go back to the slouch posture as much. You get your shoulder in a better position, whether it's trying to get someone into a submission or trying to throw a baseball. And so teaching movement habits has to go through a process, very much like we went through a process to learn our movement habits in our first 2 years of life.
No, that's awesome stuff, man. Can you give me some examples of like general like injury prevention for like any contact sports? Like it can be football, like martial arts, anything like that. Like are there some pretty common things like these are like really good habits to establish to prevent injuries?
Okay, so once we've checked the boxes that you have just good fundamental movement, all right, then the next thing we have to look at is how do you where do you produce your force from, and then more importantly, how do you reduce and absorb force? Are you good at decelerating? Are you good at absorbing force? And then from there, it's a matter of looking at certain qualities that are specific to each sport, right? So for fighters, we look at things, obviously your ability to have core strength is extremely important, but core strength isn't just the ability to like tighten your abs, right? There's a lot more to it than that. Core strength is the same thing that we use when we learn how to crawl. Core strength is the same thing that we use when we have to brace to do a heavy deadlift. You need both ends of spectrum. You need to be able to create that what we call a high threshold bracing. So when someone's gonna lay a punch into your gut, but you also have to have that low threshold reactivity when you got to quickly move from one position to the other. Yeah. So being able to have both ends of those. So on the one side, you need to be able to create a bunch of tension. That's your fundamentals. That's your front squats. That's your deadlifts. That's your be able to produce that high level tension in your core to stabilize against load and resistance. Right. Mm-hmm. Then you have the more reactive stuff that you need to be able to do, and we do that through patterning by actually having you crawl and having different crawling exercises, having you do reactive stuff with medicine balls, and how quickly can you not only turn these muscles on, but turn them back off and then turn them back on again, right? And that quick reactivity. Mm-hmm. So we need both ends of that spectrum, right? You can't just have one. So that's why you'll have, and I'm sure you've had the big meatheads who are really strong in a weight room with a barbell around, get their asses handed to them on a mat because they don't have that reactivity and that ability to access it right now. That's the difference between, and you're talking about your guest with the Olympic lifting and powerlifting. Powerlifting, there's no time element. I just have to get it from my chest to a lockout. I got to get it from the bottom to the top of the squat, and there's no time element, where Olympic lifting has to happen now. And if it doesn't, that's going to be a problem because that bar is not going to get there. And you have to be able to not only get it moving, but get underneath it really quickly. That's a completely different thing. Olympic lifters are also, other than gymnasts, probably your most mobile athlete in the Olympics. Whereas powerlifters, powerlifters can barely touch their toes, right? But that's part of the nature of their sport. They have to move the bar only a couple inches in some cases, depending on the size of the athlete. So in terms of looking at keeping you healthy, can you manage both ends of that spectrum? Can you create a lot of tension and high threshold, when you're in that when you're locked up with somebody, when the outside observer looks at you in a position with somebody and they're thinking they're not doing anything, and you can tell them how exhausting it is just to be in that static hold. And then can you create the speed and reactivity to get out of that hold and go into the next position? So you need to have both ends of the spectrum in terms of your force production and absorption. So looking at that and seeing where you're lack, we'll spend more time on one versus the other, but that's probably the number one thing. Once we've checked the basic boxes of you're mobile and stable enough, we got to have both ends of the force production curve there.
That's awesome, man. Can you tell me a little bit about where you got into this sort of thing, and how did you become the sports scientist almost? That's what the vibe I'm getting off of you, man. You seems like you're really well researched in all these different facets that you can paint the picture from sport to sport,
Well, one of the things I wanted to do is I saw early on in this field that, and this is on both sides in the rehab and the training end, it was a pick your guru industry. And what I mean by that is early on, young trainers, young therapists, they learn from a guru, and then they attach themselves to that one method, and they kind of trap themselves inside a silo and never look outside of that to see other things. And so I realized early that made no sense to me, just coming at it from a different angle. And I wanted to become what, one of the people who's a guru in our industry is Kelly Sterett, who's well known for his connections with CrossFit and doing a lot of work with mobility work. Brilliant physical therapist in California. He has a term he uses called as being a savage generalist. And that, unfortunately, what happens is we always get a mile deep into just one thing. We have people that I know that are super into kettlebells, and kettlebells are awesome, and there's so much good training that can be learned from that. But if all you know is kettlebells, then you're missing out on a whole nother world that's out there that you could be using with medicine balls and cables and Olympic lifting and all those other things. So I want to become what's called a savage generalist, where I know enough about a lot of things where I'm not just a mile deep, but a mile wide. And then when it gets to the point in any one of these specific things where I've hit my limit of what I know, I want to know the resource to get you to the next step, right? So a guy that I'm working with now on my newest project is a guy by the name of Mike Perry. He has an unbelievable facility up in the Boston area. You should probably talk to him sometimes. He trains a ton of top fighters.
That's awesome.
And so when it gets to the point where if you're a fighter and you came to me to train you, I'm going to check all the basic boxes first. And there's usually a lot of them to be filled before I tap out. But there's going to be a point where I'm going to get to the edge of my ability where I need somebody who can go deeper down that hole. And that's where I'm going to call on Mike for training fighters, or it may be you're training for the NFL Combine. I'm gonna get all your basics and fundamentals checked off really, really well, and then if we got to go deeper, then I can send you somebody like a Joe DeFranco who specializes and was the best in the world in terms of getting you ready for the NFL Combine.
Nice.
But so that's where, finding out what, checking those basics first, and then digging a little bit deeper. My personal journey's been through, mostly because all my clients have been by referral, has been through football, and has been through baseball and softball. Football, I've worked with a couple different NFL teams. I was working, as a consultant in the NFL for about 9 years.
Oh, wow.
And then I consult for a bunch of local high school teams as well. So I've worked with a ton of players in football, so I've gotten to know it pretty well, and I understand the ins and outs and the demands of the sport. Same thing with baseball and softball. Gotten to work with some of the best players in the world, and seeing the ins and outs and understanding that I can talk shop with them as far as, here's what's missing in my swing and my delivery and my fielding, and what do I need to do to connect the dots to get from where I am now to where I want to be.
How did you network your way into the NFL? Like, I'm kind of curious about that. How did you meet the people and the contacts to get involved with that?
So some of it was players, individual players by referral, and then some of the team stuff is through one of the things that I do is I teach for a company called Functional Movement Systems, and FMS, as it's called, is a baseline movement testing system that has been around for about 20 years. And it's been used in every major sport. It's been used with the military. It's been used in a lot of different areas. And I hooked up with the creators of this early on in the journey, and they kind of brought me on as one of their instructors. And I've had the opportunity to teach it all around the world, for everything from top universities and medical centers, from Mayo Clinic to New York University, to working in the military. I've gotten to be on 2 different SEAL bases and working with their teams and how they prepared, this special forces to, it started to gain some notoriety in the NFL. And so I've gotten to work with a couple of NFL teams on how to install that system within their programs. And then, that kind of just grew from that.
Man, that's pretty crazy, man. You've been around the block, dude. Like, I was in the military, and I'm just thinking about, like, some of the things in, like, in our PT stuff that we had to do. So, like, one of the things was, like we have, like, these warm-ups and cool-downs that we had to do, and I'm wondering how involved that is. I wish I had, like, there was, like, a little card that we had that was, like, all the exercises. Wish I could show you, and you'd be like, yeah, that's actually it,
Some of it may be, and what I found, and I got to teach on, I think, probably at least a half a dozen different military bases between Navy, Army, and I don't know if there was one other, but a couple around the country, and finding that even within the same base, like I taught twice on a naval base up in the Chicago area, one for the SEALs training team, and then another for who were working with just the officers, and how even disconnected they were with their training and doing different things. And so one of the reasons that FMS and people like us have gotten called in is there's a challenge in 2 ways that I've seen from my little bit of experience with the military. And that little bit of experience I always had an incredible respect and thank you for your service. And I've always had an incredible respect, but being on a military base brings it to another level. And it's like, wow, these people are different.
Yeah.
And thank God they are. All right. But here's the 2 things that we have challenges with, and you might have seen this. One is that some of the injuries that are happening are not doing, for lack of a better term, soldier stuff. Like, it's getting ready to be a soldier, and they're getting broken down in their training. And so what's happening is their PT, which should be fortifying you to be a better, more resilient, durable performer, and once, you actually have to be a soldier, well, that training is actually breaking people down, and they're getting hurt in their training. And that's definitely a broken model, right? It's defeating the purpose of what it's supposed 100%. To do. Like, the whole purpose of doing this is so I don't get hurt. And if I'm getting hurt, doing the very thing that's supposed to keep me from getting injured. So that's one of the flaws that has been found. And the other part that somewhat compounds it is that you're getting a weaker specimen showing up than you did 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, because we just as a species have gotten weaker and more fragile over time, right? And even the minimums you would have to hit to get the minimums you'd have to hit to do certain things in the military have dropped, because if not, we wouldn't get anybody.
Yeah.
Right? Just
that's crazy to think about. I'm just thinking, like, with what you said, like 40 years ago, you had the 80s, everyone's, like hot rods and, they're wrenching on cars and stuff. And that's kind of like the culture is to just be like this strong American male archetype thing. And that's who you would find in the military at that time. But now, like, everyone's kind of doing like the video games. You don't see kids outside on the playgrounds nearly as much as you did like in the 90s back in my day. So that's really crazy to think about. And they definitely have adjusted a lot of the standards, even when like maybe not when I was in, but I saw things right before I went in, and now, like, I'm always asking, like, my friends and their little brothers and sisters about, like, yo, what's changing? I'm always curious, and you're definitely hitting the mark on that. It's crazy to think about.
Something as simple as your shooting position, right? You learned probably in a half kneeling position, right? Was one of your original shooting positions,
one of them, yep.
Right?
Kneeling, prone, and prone supported.
Yeah. You know what used to be the original shooting position?
What's that?
In a deep squat.
Really?
Right? If you look at old photos from like World War I, they'd fire from a deep squat. You know why they stopped doing it?
Because not everyone can.
Because no one can get in a deep squat anymore. Right? And so if you look at it, and I've kind of seen it firsthand with some of the research we're doing with FMS with looking at physical education with kids. I'm involved in a project in a local school system where we're going in and doing movement screenings with kids. And here's what some of the scary stuff that we're finding. It screened over 600 middle school kids in just fundamental movements of like, can you touch your toes? Can you rotate? Can you reach your hands behind your back? Can you squat, right? We were finding kids, like 25-30% of the kids were reporting pain doing simple things like touching their toes.
That's
right.
Crazy.
And when I say pain, I'm trying to make it as clear as possible to these kids to say, like, this isn't, oh, this is hard or this is a stretch. Yeah. Like, ouch, that hurts. I don't want to do it anymore. Now, how middle schools are interpreting the pain and properly reporting it, I don't know. But there's a fair amount of kids walking around and it hurts to move. And so what happens when it hurts to move? They don't want to move. And so they're going to be more sedentary. They're not going to go run up the stairs. They're going to walk slower down the hallway. They're not going to go get engaged at recess and get involved in things. And so what that happens, that just snowballs. And the less they move, the more afraid they are to move. And they become adults that now are getting total hip replacements and total knee replacements at 40. Yeah. Right? And you add that and you compound it with the fact that we're in a generation of making kids either, if they are athletes, they're super specialized and they're really good at one thing, but they can't do really anything as far as just go out and play. And then because we're really quick to kind of pick them up when they fall and give them a participation trophy, is that they're weaker in the sense, listen to this, when we were there doing the testing, one of the things we wanted to see is correlations with performance. Like we would test their straight arm hang and their bent arm hang, their broad jump. We'd look at their 40-yard dash. And we were there testing their ability just to straight arm hang from a bar and timing it out. And about 3 periods into the class, someone comes in and says to the phys ed teacher I'm with, says, oh, the nurse just said she doesn't like what you're doing here because everybody's complaining that their hands hurt. Now, they're going to the nurse to say their hands hurt from hanging on a bar. And I can guarantee you the kid who went to the nurse to complain wasn't the wrestler who hung for an hour, a minute and 30 seconds. Yeah. It's a kid who hung from a bar, a 1.25 inch round bar for 20-30 seconds, and now they feel I have to go tell the nurse that my hands hurt. That's a very docile, fragile specimen, and that's going to end up down the road being somebody who's filling a PT clinic somewhere, right? I tell the story that when I opened my facility in 2002, a couple towns over, we had one physical therapist in town, and I knew the guy's name, and one chiropractor in town. Right now, if we drive down that same road, there's mega physical therapy clinics with 6-7 therapists in it on almost every corner. There's chiropractors, there's recovery centers, there's acupuncture, there's massage, there's all these things on every corner, and they're filled to the brim because musculoskeletal injuries have now become, and insurance companies even say it's the number one claim right now, above cancer, above heart disease, of all these things, of people are musculoskeletal injuries. The second highest cause for calling out of work, secondary to the common cold, is back pain, right? So we are becoming a very weak, fragile, feeble society, and so we're now at this odd crossroads in my world. Is I have this really one hand of I have really fragile people. And on the other hand, I have people that are broken because on the other hand, in the last 20 years, we've seen an incredible rise in high intensity activities, right? 20 years ago, nobody knew about MMA or any of those things except for the people who were really into it, right?
Yeah,
But now there's dojos all over the place, right? And more people getting involved. You have things like CrossFit and these boot camps and so forth that are very high intensity things. There's a multi-million-dollar industry of Spartan races and Tough Mudders and those sorts of things. People doing triathlons, people doing ultra marathons. And so you never had this much interest in high intensity activities. Yet those people are the same people who are going from their, how many of those people actually are doing it professionally? Far and few between. So those people are going from a cubicle and they're going out and do those high intensity activities and they're showing up broken. So I have fragile, I have broken. They both show up at the same PT clinic and say, my shoulder hurts. And if you've been through really bad run-of-the-mill PT, which unfortunately a fair amount has become, they both get the same 3 sets of 10 of rubber band exercises and neither of them gets better. And they end up being broken. And so we need to kind of take a step back and figure out, how did we get here? How did you actually get here with that shoulder? Because there's a big difference between the grappler who shows up and their knee hurts because they landed on it or because they went to shoot somebody and they didn't have the range and put some stress in there, versus the person whose knee hurts who, they get it from walking up and down the stairs to go to their office. There's very different ways you approach those two things.
Man, that's incredible. What would you do to approach those two things? And then I have like another follow-up question, because I'm loving like the background of what you're describing.
Cool. So the first thing is, all right, so the person who just hurts to go up and down the stairs, they had no traumatic incidents. The first thing we need to do is we need to make them a little less fragile, right? Because that's what they are. They're fragile. They're breaking down. Their body is failing them. So we have to make them a little less fragile. We have to find out where that stress is coming from. Like we said, it could be coming from their ankle, it could be coming from their hip, and let's eliminate those. And those are usually pretty easy to eliminate once you can find them. And then we got to make them a little more durable. And that's unfortunately where rehab stops short, is they get you out of pain, but they don't get you back to where you need to go back to function, where you can go out and walk or go out and, do that 5K or whatever it is you want to do throughout your day. On the other side, you have that grappler with the knee. All right, we have to, same thing. We have to eliminate what are some of the stressors that are in there, and then I have to make sure that your knee can uphold the demands of the sport. Meaning, can it decelerate when you're trying to shoot somebody's leg? Can it produce enough force when you're trying to get up off the ground? And if that's the case, you need to be more specifically durable at a much higher level than this person does. And so, if you say is a lunge exercise good? Well, depends, and it depends on who I'm giving it to and which version. I can give you 25 different versions of the lunge without even thinking all that hard, and one's going to be perfect for this person, one's going to be perfect for this person, but if you switch up their programs, you're going to kill both of them.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because you need to work different stability groups for different parts of the knee. It's not as simple as, just do this.
And it's not even stability parts. It's really more, and it's not even so much a part as it is a pattern, and regressing it to the point where the art of training is really getting to where you're successful but challenged, right? Challenged in that what doesn't challenge us doesn't change us. And the whole reason training even works, and I have to explain this at the most fundamental level to someone, is to say, how does exercise work? You go and lift up a heavy weight and your body goes, holy shit, if you're going to keep doing that, I'm going to have to get more, your nervous system working better to get those muscles working. I'm going to have to maybe add a little bit more muscle tissue there, strengthen your bones and so forth around it. So like that's how it works. And so you respond and adapt. It's stress and adaptation, right? That's how it works. So we need to be challenged enough that we create that, but you also have to be successful, right? Successful in that you're actually gaining something from the exercise. So if we go inside and we put weight on the bar, I'm going to ask you to squat, and you say, well, I can squat 200 pounds. If I put 100 pounds on there, it's not going to be challenging enough. It's not going to create enough challenge to change you. But if I put 300 pounds, it'll be certainly challenging, but it may crush you, and now you're not going to be successful anymore. So the art is to find that edge of your ability and where that is, and get you just beyond that to push you so you get a little bit better the next day.
I remember actually just on to that point, like about you need to be challenged. Like I remember I had a knee injury and I was going to PT for it, and they were making me do like a leg press on just the one leg that was injured, and the weight was like 20 pounds. I'm like, come on, like I this is too easy. And they were like, no, like like I guess maybe it's like insurance purposes on their end. They're like, no, you have to do what we say. So like the therapist would walk away, I'd bump it up to like 60 pounds. I'm like, we're getting better. Like we're getting more in the neighborhood. I'd bump it up. They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, this is what I need. Like I stopped going after like a couple weeks. Like, and I just got a new gym membership at LA Fitness. I'm like, all right, you showed me what I need to do. Let me actually fix it now myself.
And unfortunately, that story is all too common.
Yeah.
You know, kind of what drove me towards this is I used to have really bad back pain, like to the point where I slept on the floor for like 6 months. And then eventually my mom's like, you gotta go get that looked at. So I went to a general doctor. I didn't know any better back then. This is the 80s. So I go to a general doctor, and the doctor, you know, after waiting forever, you know, he comes in, he looks at me, and he looks at me kind of like I would look at if you popped your hood and said, can you figure out what's wrong with the bus? I have no idea. I have no idea. Unless there's like an extension cord unplugged. I have no idea what it is. So he looked at my back the same way, and he goes, oh, could be slip disc, could be pinched nerve, could be anything. I said, really? I waited here for an hour for you to tell me could be anything? Like my mom could have told me could be anything. Like I didn't need to be here for this. So you know what I did? I went to the gym and I just started working out. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I noticed when I worked out, my back didn't hurt anymore. And so I realized there may be something to this.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what I was doing. So I said, well, if I'm going to invest the time in going to the gym, I should probably learn a little more about it other than what I've done, you know, that I learned from my football coaches and just doing what their coach taught them and doing bench press and curls until you can't do them anymore. Right. And that's how I kind of started this journey of learning more about it, to realize that there's a lot more to this. And that's kind of, you know, how it, you know, got me to here, because I've heard that story way too many times.
Yeah, I believe it. So I kind of want to like take a step back, because what we were talking about earlier was just kind of like how the sedentary lifestyle of America today is just, you know, dooming a lot of these people, and they're, you know, the lifestyle is actually what's causing these chronic injuries. What are some things that you think are like simple things in the culture that we could change to make America just healthier?
The number one easiest thing is walking. Right. And the problem is because we've created this picture of what fitness needs to be. It needs to be machines with blinking lights that tell you how many calories you burn, which is all bullshit anyway.
Yeah.
It has to be this thing where we see commercials where you have to be, you know, slamming ropes and flipping tires and doing all that sort of stuff. And yeah, that's one part of fitness. But if you're doing nothing now, going for a walk is significantly more impactful than what some of those things may be to do. And even for people that have our high level athletes, the number one recovery tool, like there's all these recovery centers out there with cryo tanks and all those things. Some of those things may have some benefit, but the number one recovery tool is going for a walk, right? And the effect that will have on you, not only physically, but physiologically, in terms of mentally, being outside, all those things can cure quite a bit. And so the first thing I tell people is go out and walk. There's very few people that can't just go for a walk, right? And even if you can go for a walk around the block, it's going to make a huge impact. And then around the block becomes 2 blocks, and 2 blocks becomes 3 blocks. And that's just that progressive overload that we talked about before of being challenged but successful. And each time you do it, getting a little bit easier. And that's probably the first place I get people to go, because it's going to at least create the habit, because exercise just like that is a habit, and we do what's kind of just part of our day. The best industry that's out there that has created these habits is the dental industry. I've never heard anybody complain, I don't have time to brush my teeth. Oh, that 10 minutes a day is just way too much. And it's not even 10 minutes. Yeah. But they've created a thing. It's the only industry where we actually proactively do something as a habit twice a day, if not more, to create a better outcome that is not necessarily guaranteed. Like, it's not even guaranteed that if I skip brushing my teeth a couple of days that my teeth are going to fall out, right? And so it's not this one for one thing that people think exercise is. That exercise is cumulative as well. Is that it's not I go do a workout and then I'm good. I have to continually do it, just like I continually brush my teeth to get the positive response. And even people who brush their teeth end up needing to get root canals. Even people who exercise sometimes get hurt. The problem is now exercise itself has become a risk factor, because people are so fragile and because they're so broken down that they go and, you know, it all starts Monday, and they go Monday morning and they listen to the Rocky soundtrack and they're going to go full board, and now they overdo it and then they get hurt. And now they're caught in this trap of, I want to exercise, but it hurts to exercise, but what do I do? Right. And so creating those habits is the number one thing to do where you're successful, but challenged. And the first thing to do is just start with some fundamental things like walking. And we overlook that. We think it's too simple. It can't work that way, but it does.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So where did you like study to become like the, like the consultant and everything that you're doing now?
So did a traditional exercise science, university study at William Patterson University over here in New Jersey. And then from there, it was a lot of kind of looking at who are the best in the world at what they do and the things that intrigue me. And I would go and take anything I could from them, whether it was a course, whether it was an internship or a certification that they had. And then what it would do is the greatest resources open doors to other resources. I want to say, okay, well, where did you learn from? And then go and get their book or get their course or find a way to spend time with them. And it just keeps leading down a path that of discovering all these different things that you just put tools in your toolbox to learn from. And having that open mind of saying that if you can teach me something, I'm gonna take it. And that no one is really creating anything in our industry. They're just repackaging and doing better, more efficient ways of doing it. A lot of what we steal is, ancient Greeks were using medicine balls. Yogis have been around for 2,500 years doing a lot of the same things that we try to fashion as functional exercise now, but it's, been here way before I was here and be here long after I'm gone.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense, man. I really like the approach that you're taking where you're collecting a lot of different mentors to create, your ideal way of approaching this that makes most sense to you. So what are some like more difficult clients that you've had to what are some like challenges that you've run into where it's like, man, this guy has like this weird chronic injury, and how did you overcome that or help them overcome it? Right.
A lot of it is just getting better checklists to see, there's stuff. And if you're good at what you do in this field, in any field, you look back at something you did a year ago, sometimes less, or 5 years ago, and you're like, oh man, what was I thinking? And it's not something that you weren't you're thinking. It's one of those things where unless you know what to look for, you miss it, right? And it's one of those things where you create this, sometimes they call it that reticular activating system, where once you get a red car, you start noticing all the red cars on the road, right? And once you've learned something, to realize something as simple as how do you detect hypermobility in somebody, right? And doing a simple test, looking at someone's, watching a movie, it takes literally 30 seconds to do. And all of a sudden I have a whole new perspective on this client that I didn't have 10 years ago because I didn't even know to look for it, right? Looking at probably the thing that's most impactful that I've learned about in the last 10 years has been breathing. And the impact that breathing has is so significant, and all the different aspects of that. And there is no one absolute right way to breathe, but how important breathing is for everything. I tell everybody, you can go for, weeks without food. You can go for days without water. You can only go a couple minutes without air. And so it is one of our most essential things, and we screw it up royally. And then learning how to apply, not only learn how to correct that, but learning how to apply that specifically to your training to create better outcomes is mind-blowing how impactful it can be.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of doing breath work. Do you know who Wim Hof is?
So I studied a lot of Wim stuff. I do a lot of his stuff. I actually got to go to one of his live events in New York.
Tell me about it.
And,
I would love to try
and got to meet him. I got a picture taken with him. Got to
it.
meet him. Got to do the ice bath, the whole thing. Very cool experience. And he's someone that has been a great loudspeaker for bringing attention to things that have been around. Wim didn't invent that breathing. That's a type of breathing that's been around for thousands of years through yoga. And he studied, yoga as a child growing up. And that's how he took all these things and incorporated it and just repackaged it into a very palatable way that people can jump on board with it. And there's another example of just an extreme thing of people, putting ice tubs in their backyard, that is something that people are thriving to get more challenge and get more vitality in their lives. So he's been a great spokesperson for that. But Wim Hof breathing doesn't work for everything. It doesn't mean that's bad. It just means you have to understand that's what it does and where its place is, right? In creating this response in your nervous system. And everything in our body is regulated by what's called your autonomic nervous system, right? Your autonomic nervous system gets its name because it was always thought to be automatic, right? And like it controls your blood pressure and your heart rate and all these sorts of things. And there's two sides of this. There's your fight or flight, which is your sympathetic system, right? And then there's your rest and relax, which is your parasympathetic. And your body is just always trying to get back to homeostasis or status quo. So if it was really cold in here, we'd shiver to warm up. If it was really hot, we'd sweat to cool down. And so you're always reacting in nature to try to get back to that. And the reason why you have both sides is if a bear walked onto the bus right now, you'd want to activate your sympathetic system, right? You'd want your blood pressure up. You want adrenaline to get released. You want your heart rate up because you're either going to have dinner or be dinner. Yeah. And that's just going to get figured out really quickly, right? But it's not supposed to be on all day. And so the problem is we have this moderate level of stress where not only do people not have the ability to get to an 8 or 9 out of 10, but they don't have the ability to recover back to a 2 or 3. And so they die at a simmering 6 where they just burn themselves out. And you hear about adrenal fatigue and people are just always burnt out and always tired because they don't work the two extremes of the spectrum. They just kind of die in the middle. And so something like Wim Hof breathing actually creates a sympathetic response because it overemphasizes your inhale. Your inhale is going to start to increase your sympathetic response. And so that big, but you have very short exhale. That's a very different thing than if I wanted to create a parasympathetic response and I wanted you to settle your brain and body. I'm going to exaggerate the exhale where I'm going to learn more of a box breathing or yoga type breathing where I'm going to twice as long as my inhale, as they say, a good healing breath. I need to learn how to manage both ends of that depending on what my activity is. Definitely. If I'm going to go lift, do a heavy deadlift, I don't want to be doing a yoga breath where with this long, slow, relaxing exhale, it's going to lose pressure internally and that would help stabilize my trunk. It's not going to create the force output that I'm looking for, and it's going to be completely opposite of what I want to have. But at the same time, if I'm a batter and I'm up with in the bottom of the 9th with bases loaded and 2 outs, I don't want to Wim Hof breathing because I'm not going to get into that good flow state where I perform at my highest level. So learning how to manipulate that, and in the course that I'm teaching now is I have what I call a wheel of breathing, and I explain about 8 different types of breathing that you can apply depending on what your training goal is.
Dude, that's incredible. I know, like, I'll tell a little breathwork story. So recently I did a jiu-jitsu tournament, and my first, like, so I did 2 divisions, and my first match I lost. I just like adrenaline dumped. It was like they called my name right after I just got done pooping. Like it was just, a lot of things were going wrong. I wasn't ready for it and everything, and it just went wrong. So then my next division came up, and I was like, all right, I need to have like a better preparation for this next match. So I changed the type of music I'm listening to and everything. And then I go in and I start doing like big, like I had a breathwork person on my podcast before. Her name's Natalie Boss. She actually does jiu-jitsu as well. And one that she does is like to calm herself is she comes big in, and she like makes like you vocally go, and that like it's like a good trigger for your mind to know like it's okay kind of thing. You know what I mean? And I was doing that, listening to some of the music that I'll do when I like try to meditate and things, and I was able to like keep my heart rate at like a really cool, like you said, 2 or 3, and because at the beginning of the day I was at that 6, maybe a 7, and then I'm getting on the mat, I'm hitting that 10, and then I'm coming down at like a 4, and I'm just like, oh, I'm so done, So I was able to come onto the mat, and I performed great. Like I actually won by submission the first 2 matches, and then I ended up losing by points in my third, but every match felt incredible. So being able to have that mind-body connection is so powerful with using breath work as the connection tool.
Breath is the hack into that autonomic nervous system where I can actually control my heart rate to some degree and fluctuate my heart rate by doing different types of breathing strategies, where there's even things you can do I can recommend a couple great books. Actually, Renzo Gracie actually has a brand new book on breathing. That's pretty fascinating, talking about how he utilizes it. There's a book called a whole system called Oxygen Advantage by McKeon is the author of it. And he talked about using breath holds within your training. And so little things like doing your cardio training and having intermittent breath holds within there, you can see I could be going at the same pace, same speed, same level on a bike, and I can swing my heart rate 20, 30 beats just by doing a breath hold. So understanding that the power that you can create with this.
Were you swinging it down to calm yourself?
You can swing it both ways.
Oh, wow,
You swing
dude,
it both
that's
ways.
crazy.
You can,
I need to look into that.
yeah.
That's
And
pretty
so,
wild.
and then even how you breathe, like where your air is coming in. Another great book, James Nestor has a book called Breath. And he talks about the impact of nasal breathing. And he went and he found a specialist in this at Stanford and said, I want to do some, hey, do you have any research on this? And he said, well, I don't feel comfortable ethically doing it because I know the harmful downfall of mouth breathing and what it can cause. So he said, well, I'll do it. And he found him and another breathing expert to volunteer for the research. And what they did is they basically packed their nasal passages so they had to breathe through their mouth. And within 2 weeks, all of their health markers plummeted and everything completely went south. They were snoring. They were having all these sorts of health issues. And then as soon as they unpacked their nasal passages and went back to nasal breathing, fitness improved, all the health measures improved, their snoring immediately stopped. Like all these things changed just by learning how to breathe nasally versus breathing through the mouth can completely change things. Even if you're competing, your opponent's across from you and they're breathing through the mouth, they're cooked, they're gassed. Yeah. And one of the best ways I tell if you truly are, if it's a conditioning thing, do this with my football teams because I'll be on the sideline with the coach, and one of the assistants of coach will say, oh, we're out of shape. We need to run more. And I'll say, no, watch the next time out in the fourth quarter when they come over. And if they all come over and they still have their mouthpieces in, then we're not gassed. Because if we were, they would have the mouthpieces out and they'd have their hands on their knees and be huffing and puffing. But if they can still have their mouthpieces in and they're still breathing through nose because we do a lot of work on that in their conditioning, then it's not a fatigue issue. We're not losing because of that. We're losing because probably we just suck at football, right? Or they're just bigger and more talented than we are. But it's not a conditioning thing. And running more may actually be the worst thing for us as opposed to what you think we need. Yeah. So looking at those things and how it carries over into your sport-specific conditioning is really important. Learn how to recognize those things.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome, man. Well, I have a couple more questions because I know you have to get out of here, so I'll try to just breeze through these. I want to know, like, what is your, like, normal workout? Like, you know, what's a Monday look like for you?
For me personally?
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I can tell you're jacked, man. You're definitely slinging some steel
around. not as much as I used to, and unfortunately, because I'm in the process of launching a new course for strength coaches and personal trainers and physical therapists, and so because I've been working on this course, my workouts have kind of taken the back seat for the last couple months. So I'm trying to get the best I can out of the little time I have, and sometimes it's a BTN, it's a better than nothing workout. Yeah. So when I am time crunched, I'll give you an example. This morning is the two things that I'll lean on is I will go and do sprint work, like some interval sprint work. That is another thing that once you've gotten past where you can walk and there's no physical limitations, mobility, stability is all there, and you're functionally sound. Sprinting is probably one of the things that does not get enough attention or credit. It's now starting to finally come back in vogue, but just all out sprinting has so much carryover to sports performance, to conditioning, to all these different things. So just some type of sprint intervals, depending on, you know, what your goal is, what your capabilities are. But like this morning, I just did some walk sprint intervals. That's one thing if I'm pressed for time. Another thing is a name I'll recommend if you want to look for just kind of some good fundamentals, and he has a very unique way of boiling things down. He's actually worked with a lot of fighters. He started with training Soviet soldiers, as a matter of fact. There's a guy by the name of Pavel Tsatsouline, all right? And he has multiple books, and his books are always boiled down to just 2 exercises to make it simple. So one of his first book was called The Naked Warrior. And he said, look, I need to create soldiers that are really strong and functional and durable, but I don't have squat racks out in the field. I need to be able to do it. So he boiled it down into 2 things, a single leg pistol squat and a single arm push-up. And if you can do both of those on both sides, you're a pretty functional, strong, human being. So that's a great example of that. He has another one called Simple and Sinister, where you go, and this is actually what I did, that I'll do. It takes me 10 minutes to go back and forth between kettlebell swings and Turkish get-ups. And kettlebell swings will create some lower body and hip power, right? So I'll kind of check that end of the spectrum. And we talked about creating that reflexive turn it on, turn it off quickly. Kettlebell swing kind of checks those boxes. And then do you do that with the Turkish get up, which is creating mobility under tension and being able to have good stability as you're creating this mobility from the floor to standing and back down. So those two back and forth, 10 swings and a get up on each side back and forth is a good way for me to kind of just keep things in check until I can get back to my more traditional lifting of doing deadlifts and front squats and presses and those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. So what's like an ideal workout look like for you?
If I had more time, if I had more time, I am somebody that leans towards a lack of mobility, especially in my upper body from a lot of dumb years of doing nonsense to trash my shoulders.
Yeah.
So I need to I'd spend a good amount of time up front trying to just get good mobility through my thorax and shoulders, because that's what I need.
Mm-hmm.
Or for somebody else, it may be something different.
So you're doing like stretching, or
it's not even so much stretching, but getting mobility, doing certain things to get rotation through my trunk, to get extension through my trunk, to get mobility, throughout my entire shoulder complex is something that I have to constantly battle with because of the nonsense I did when I was younger, when I didn't know any better.
You like doing like cabling workouts for that stuff?
Not so much isolated stuff. There's a lot of things that I'll do just working on T-spine rotation, whether it's laying on my side, whether it's on hands and knees, whether it's up in a tall kneeling position with kettlebells. Those sorts of things kind of set the foundation so where my shoulders aren't going to be the barrier when I go to press a bar or where I go to do a pull-up or something like that. Yeah. And then once I can get through those, if I can check, I'll usually have a couple days that are more bilateral work, meaning it's your fundamental, either a deadlift or a squat, some sort of press, whether it's overhead or a bench, some sort of pull, whether it's a pull-up or a row. And then those are going to be my fundamentals, the meat and potatoes of the workout. And then other days I'll do unilateral versions of those, where it's going to be single arm, single leg squat or deadlift, and then single arm, single leg pressing and pulling and those sorts of things. So if I can mix and match between those two, that's kind of the fundamentals. And then I'll fill it in depending on what else I might be working on for that given period of time. I may add in some medicine ball work or some cable work or those sorts of things, but I don't shy away from the fundamentals. And so I kind of look at a 5-point checklist when I put together a workout for myself or anybody else. The first is function. I want to make sure that if I'm either improving function or I'm at least not taking away from it, right? So it doesn't mean everything I do is a quote-unquote functional exercise. I'm doing bicep curls like the next person, but it's not my whole workout, and it's not going to rob from my function because I counteract that with some other stuff. The second thing I look at is foundation. So am I doing my basic squat, lunge, push, pull, hinge, those sorts of things. Then the next thing I look at is fillers. The fillers are the little things I'll put in between, whether it's breath work, whether it's mobility work, whether it's some stability and balance work, whether it's any of the things that I might want to add on as extra spices, but they're going to kind of fortify what I'm doing in the foundational stuff. Then I look at, do I need any kind of finisher, whether it's just a really good cool down, or maybe I add a little bit of conditioning in there, whether it's an echo bike or some prowler sprints or something like that. And then the last piece is feedback. Like, what is my feedback? Did I was able to get the same weight for more reps? Was I able to get more weight? Was I able to cover more distance on a bike? Was I able to get cover 10 yards faster on the prowler? What is my feedback to make sure that I'm actually moving in the right direction? And feedback, am I, coming away from this without hips, knees, shoulders, back being sore? Do I feel better when I'm done? All those things of feedback to make sure that I'm in the right direction. And then the other piece of feedback is looking into readiness and recovery, whether it's using an Aura ring, a whoop band, a Morpheus strap, any of those things, to see how's my body responding to this physiologically.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. It seems like you're really covering the spectrum. You really know your body well and what it needs.
And it's the same approach I take with anybody. And I'm probably my own worst client. Right? I treat myself the shittiest of anybody on my client list.
Of course. That's awesome. So let me, like one of the last questions here. What's your music playlist while you work out look like?
That'll vary. It most often I'm going to lean on old school rap that I grew up with in the 80s and 90s. Awesome, right. And yeah, when shit needs to get real, you can always lean on Wu-Tang and DMX.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Hell yeah, dude. Hell yeah, dude. That's awesome, man. All right, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for giving me your time today. Can you let everybody out there know where can they find more information about Eric and the programs that you provide for everybody?
Cool. I'm on social media, just Eric Dagati, EricDagati, and if you can see that down there as well. And if you do the same thing on my website, just ericdagati.com. On my homepage, I actually add, because I go out and teach around the world and do these kind of things, is I have an Ask Eric. And you just ask a question about training, goes right to my email, and then I'll do my best to get back to you within a couple days and hopefully answer any questions that you have.
That's awesome, man. Well, thank you for your time.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been on a bunch of podcasts. First one on a bus, so check this one off the list.
Yeah, I think I popped a lot of cherries for that one, dude. That's
cool.
Awesome, though. Take it easy, guys.